The NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery is an intimate museum space in a university setting. At the Art Gallery, we present curated exhibitions of art and culture of local relevance and international significance. We also invite you to explore our exhibitions in the project space and around campus, as well as our activities both online and in our reading room.
The reading room, located next to the Art Gallery. It's a space all communities can utilize and learn more about a wide variety of different topics.
The project space is the NYUAD Art Gallery's auxiliary venue to nurture young emerging artists and curators.
We support a number of other art projects and activities beyond our exhibition spaces. We care for the permanent art installations on campus, like Hassan Sharif's Copper Wire, which welcomes guests to NYUAD.
We aim to create an atmosphere where everyone feels encouraged to share their thoughts and experiences.
We hope that you will visit us online and in person to discover our exhibitions, events, and publications. We look forward to welcoming you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first Off the Stage event for our 7th season. We are delighted that you all could join us this evening. My name is Reem Saleh, and I'm the Associate Director of External Relations and Partnerships for the Art Center at NYU Abu Dhabi. This Arts Chat is presented in partnership with NYUAD Art Gallery and NYUAD Career Development Center, and is part of our Off the Stage series, which also includes community dinners, visits to NYUAD classes, post-show Q&As, and career chats. Artists in residence are involved in various off-the-stage events, and the best way to hear about them is through our newsletter or by checking the Off the Stage tab on our website. We also invite incredible leaders in the field of visual and performing arts to be part of our chat series. I want to thank the Head of Public Programs and Partnerships at Art Jameel, Lana Shamma, and Theatre for One Resident Director SRĐA for joining the panel. As a reminder, we will have a Q&A session with the panel at the end of the conversation, so feel free to post your questions in the chat. Arts chats are recorded for social media and internal archiving purposes. I will now hand over to Michael.
Thank you so much, Reem. And once again, thank you, Lana and SRĐA, for joining us today. Before we get started, I think it would be great if we could have a brief introduction from the two of you, where you could talk a little bit about your journey in the world of working as an artist, working with the arts, and how you've arrived at where you are today, whether that is in the capacity of the Head of Public Programming at Arts Jameel or as Resident Director of Theatre for One. Lana, why don't you start us off?
Sure. I'm going to go the long way and kind of go into how I got to where I am today. So I'm based in Dubai, out of the Jameel Art Center, which is Dubai's first contemporary museum of art. I work for an organization called Art Jameel, which works internationally but has headquarters both in Jeddah, where we're opening a creative neighborhood called Hayy Jameel, and of course in Dubai. I always worked in arts and culture, but didn't know exactly how that path would kind of be paved for me. In undergrad, I studied sociology and Spanish. And then I thought I would end up going to law school because I knew I didn't want to be a doctor like the rest of my friends. Somehow that didn't happen for me. And then I ended up finding a public diplomacy program and got my master's in that. So that was kind of a joint program between international relations and media studies, where I got to kind of carve out my own path focusing on cultural exchange. From there, I applied for a Fulbright grant, which is a government grant that allows for Americans to go study a topic abroad and kind of develop their research. And then from there, I got an offer to move to Doha, where I worked for the Doha Tribeca Film Festival, which is where Reem and I initially met. And then from there, ended up working in publishing with a publishing house called Bloomsbury, which is based in the UK, known for such hits as Harry Potter. And then from there, I moved to Dubai, where I've been here now for almost 5 years, working for Art Jameel on helping open the center and kind of build up communities in the lead up to opening our doors just almost 3 years ago.
It's amazing. Thank you so much, Lana. SRĐA, would you like to take the stage?
Totally. Good morning, everyone. I am tuning in here from Brooklyn, New York, so it is morning where I am. My name is SRĐA. I got my start, so I am a refugee from Sarajevo, Bosnia, so my start was kind of unconventional. I was born in Sarajevo, Bosnia, a few months before the war broke out, and spent my early years as a refugee before resettling to Des Moines, Iowa, which is in the middle of the Midwest in the United States. I really was very actively involved in storytelling as a child. I feel like as a refugee, our stories were one of the big things that we held on to. So starting from a young age, I was doing stand-up comedy and I was doing improv and I was involved in school plays. And that led to a love of being the person behind the scenes, actually not being the person on stage, but being the director, being the person formulating those stories. So when I was 18 years old, I went to school at Emerson College in Boston and got my degree in theater studies directing with a minor in psychology. And throughout that program, I started actually working in New York with a company called Tectonic Theater Project, which creates devised works and training in their technique of moment work. I graduated college a year early and had my first opportunity to work on my first Broadway show, which was Terrence McNally's final play on Broadway called Mothers and Sons. So at 21 years old, I was working on Broadway as an assistant director, and that led me to a long career as an assistant and associate, working on multiple Broadway shows, working for Disney, working at Radio City, really cutting my teeth in these very big spectacle works and getting involved in theater from some of the largest spaces in the world. And with that kind of education in what Broadway theater looks like, what spectacle looks like, what's required to put on a 78-person show, starting to get involved in world tours and things like that, I found that what I was really hungry for was an opportunity to get back into the basics of why I fell in love with theater, which was working with a performer one-on-one. So about 5 years ago, as I was developing a piece that was a one-on-one audience experience about refugees, I had the opportunity to get involved with Theater for One. And since then, I have been working as the resident director of Theater for One, which essentially means that over the past 4 or 5 years, every residency that we do, I am directing pieces for our residencies. I'm running and overseeing how those residencies come to fruition and what we do and how we actually produce them. So I have worked kind of across the board, recently launching our European residency in Dublin, both at the Cork Midsummer Festival and Dublin Theatre. We just recently finished a residency here in New York at Manhattan West and relaunched our new ADA accessible booth. And then here we are doing our digital residencies, which came about as a response to the pandemic and have just been such an incredible way for us to continue doing our work and continue bringing theater in a singular, ephemeral way across the world. So that's where I am right now. I also run my own business. I'm a creative director and direct quite a bit in various capacities, just as a part of my freelance career in addition to Theater for One.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I'd like to echo a sentiment that I just saw in the chat, that I'm honored to have such distinguished panelists here with us today. Your careers are incredible to think about, let alone I can't imagine what the lived experience was like. Very diverse backgrounds. So I'd really like to dig into that for the conversation that we're going to have today. And to start right off the bat, the theme of today's arts chat is innovating and adapting to a changing world in the arts. And to that effect, I would like to start off by asking, how have the central themes of your work in the arts and with other artists, how have those central themes changed over the past 2 years specifically? SRĐA, would you like to start us off this time?
Yeah, I think that this is a beautiful way for us to talk a little bit about Theater for One and this digital residency that we're doing. So there has been something for the longest time. I feel like when people would ask me why I do theater, I always express the fact that there was this magical instantaneous moment that happens when you are an audience member and someone's performing on stage, and all of a sudden there's this kind of kinesthetic connection that happens, and it's very hard to explain, but it is like there's magic in the air. And it happened to me when I was a young person growing up in the Midwest and seeing, you know, my first Broadway tour or seeing a community theater production. And it's the reason that I've committed my life to this form. And so I think in the past 2 years, since we've had to push from live in-person experiences to finding new ways to connect, I think a big thing that has been a part of the themes that we're exploring is new ways to find connection, and ways to find connection without that element of in-person liveness. And how can we create liveness in a digital capacity? Or if we are working in a film and television medium, how can we continue to create that special moment that exists only when you're sitting, you know, in an audience and watching a performer on stage? How can we replicate that? How can we lean into it? What does it change about the form, and what does it allow us to embrace that we haven't been able to previously? I think that has been, while it's also a you know, something that we're considering in terms of the form and what we're creating, I do think it has a lot of thematic elements, because I think it's adjusting the type of work that we're doing, the type of conversations that we're having, the way that we are going about those conversations. A number of playwrights that have written pieces for this iteration of Theater for One and our various iterations, digital iterations of Theater for One, really are asking the question of, what does instantaneous connection look like when it is over a digital platform, when it is across continents, when it is not the expected experience of two people sharing a space together? And I think that continued investigation of how that form and how that connection will change is one of the biggest kind of thematic shifts that I've seen in the past 2 years in terms of the work and conversations that we're having in the live performing arts specifically.
Great, thank you so much. That actually brings up an interesting question, which I will get to later, about transitioning versus creating new art for this period specifically. But before that, Lana, again, how have the central themes of your work with the arts and with artists, how have they changed over the past 2 years?
That's a good question, because when you work in public programs, you have multiple publics. So we're held accountable to the artists and the creatives that create the shows and the programs, but of course our audiences too. So when you're thinking thematically about what you're organizing, initially when, you know, everyone kind of slowed down between, I'd say, March and May of last year, the immediate instinct was, how do we support our publics, our communities? So we immediately kind of pivoted to thinking how we can do that, and financial was one way, but also making sure that artists who were perhaps counting on working in the busy art season, who no longer have that income, are able to sustain themselves for X amount of months, because we didn't know when everything would be quote unquote normal again. So one example of how we did that was a festival called Jadaf Allowed Online, and that was a festival we'd had in real life pre-COVID. And then in designing it, we thought about these different communities we are held accountable to. So for example, we worked with local emerging artists to put on digital workshops. And those digital workshops served the families who were trying to figure out how to homeschool their children. But then we also worked with local musicians to put on digital concerts within that. Then we were really mindful that the support local movement and the shop local movement was ever more important, so we could support mom and pop businesses that are in our ecosystem. So we worked with Frying Pan Adventures, who had researched mom and pop restaurants, to create a food guide for people to order from when they were home, or thinking about businesses that could use our support that were kind of more on the design side of things. So that was one way we did it. Another way we did it was actually thinking about geography and trying to flatten that completely. Through our public programs, we run a commissioning program called Art Jameel Commissions. So year 1 was sculpture, year 2 was writing and research, and year 3 was supposed to be painting and drawing. So we stopped for a moment and realized, hang on, people might not be allowed to leave their houses and access their studios. They might be financially struggling and not able to secure the materials that they need. So let's pivot a little bit and think about it in a realistic way. So we scratched the painting and drawing, and then we went into digital art. And digital art could be something you create at home on a computer. And the theme we decided to embrace was time, something we all thought we had a lot of, and something that some of us felt a scarcity of. And that way we were able to award an artist named Nadim Shufi, who was born and raised in Abu Dhabi, based in Beirut right now, for a digital film that now exists online. And it really kind of represented that era of collaboration. Given that he was in Beirut, he had 8 collaborators, none of whom live in Lebanon anymore, and really kind of flattened the idea of having to work together and collaborate in a studio to create a project.
Thank you so much, Lana. That actually, you've covered a lot of what I was going to ask about my next question, which was, how have you and the organizations you worked with created a space for change and adaptability during this moment of transition? But if there's anything you'd like to add to that in the context of the question, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the other themes that really emerged is mental health and mindfulness. I think we're all more empathetic professionally and socially to how people are feeling. So that's a strand that's definitely emerged in a lot of the programming that we do. We used to kind of change over our exhibitions every 3 months, but then we realized that there is an advantage to slowing down, digging deeper into the exhibitions, allowing for people to visit multiple times, and engaging more deeply, rather than kind of ticking it off their list and saying that they've come and visited the exhibition. In addition to that, I think that slowing down allows for us to nurture those communities I had mentioned before. But we can definitely talk about how we're designing other programs as a result of that. I think SRĐA was nodding along as I was talking as well.
Yeah, thank you, Lana. SRĐA, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have found specifically in terms of our programming is that shift from, I think that what we're finding is this is giving us an opportunity to take our work to an international level. And I think that that is something that has been just expanding our notion of what our audience can be. I think for the longest time for us in the live performing arts, our audience was based on the people that were in that locality, and based on, even if we had a tourist audience coming in, it was based on the fact of people that could come to that space, people that could see that performance. I think so much of the world that we were living in was marketing for that specific audience. And I think that in New York City, that means a very specific thing, and that breeds a very specific type of performance and theater and methodology and the way that you are presenting these pieces. And I think the moment that the pandemic shifted things and all of a sudden our audience base became international became people from all of these various countries, became people from all these different various walks of life, experiences with live performing arts, and also experiences in a digital platform. I think that that has been something that has invited people into the fold that may have not been, traditional theater goers in the past, but it has given them the opportunity to, if someone has a mobility impairment and has not been able to see live theater, it's been really reaffirming for us to be able to create this space and create this opportunity and to adjust our own notions of what it means to be an audience member and how we support people from all walks of life and make sure that we are having an accessible opportunity to present theater to people across the board. I think that has been a really thrilling piece of the equation, and I think that's going to continue to change. It continues to adjust the way that we talk about the work, it continues to adjust the way that we talk about marketing the work, and the way that we put this out into the world. So I think that that shift from local to international has really been something that is going to have kind of reverberations for the way that we program and consider season programming, artistic direction, all of the above, in the way that we present and curate work here at Theater for One, and I think in the live performing arts in general.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. I agree with, well, everything that you guys have talked about, especially on the point of how this transition to the new mediums that we've seen has lowered a lot of barriers that existed in a physical space, and how adjusting to these new audiences, these new publics, as Lana put it, it's a challenge, but it's also an incredible opportunity to do a lot more with what we have. So, SRĐA, just to go back to the question that I had mentioned earlier, looking at some of the works that you've created over the past 2 years, once the pandemic has started, the digital PSA series, Vote PSA, and the apocalyptic musical film, The Band at the End of the World, among other projects, were released during the pandemic, if I'm not wrong. So how was the process of creating these projects different from the process of transitioning an existing project like Theater for One to the current situation?
Totally. This has been something that, a great question. Thank you for, if anyone's interested in knowing more about those works, you can go to my website, www.sr-da.com, SRĐA.com. And so, yeah, so Vote PSA, thank you for rep. So in the midst of the elections here in the United States, about a year ago, almost exactly, I decided for myself that we needed more education for young people, for millennials and Gen Zers here in the United States, of different voting statistics of how many people actually turn out to vote, a lot of things that are kind of like shocking statistical examples of things that people aren't aware of. And so what I decided was to take a lot of what we do at Theater for One in terms of you're really minimizing the amount of people that are required on set and minimizing the amount of people that are required to create something. So essentially I created a 20-episode digital PSA series that premiered on Instagram. We've had over like 800,000 views so far. Ariana Grande shared it. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert shared it. We really had a very successful run leading up to the election. But the wild thing about it was the entire team was myself. We found there was one creator that was involved in every episode, and that was the extent of the team. So it became two people were all that was required in terms of pulling this off. And I think that minimization of the amount of people that are required on set has asked us to wear a lot more hats in the midst of the pandemic. And similarly, referencing the film, I did a film called The Band at the End of the World, which is about a band traveling through the world, and they essentially end up at this apocalyptic theater. It's a commentary on COVID and the return of live performance, or the disappearance of live performance. But that was something where on set we really had to minimize the full team. We didn't have production assistants. We didn't have gaffers on set with us. We really were working with a very minimal base of people that I think in order to create things in a live capacity, specifically with COVID requirements and specifically with, trying to keep our crew sizes small, that has been something that has been adjusted. And I continue to see it in my film and TV work that I'm doing, sets are smaller, theatrical sets are smaller. We're really aware of the amount of people on set and what's required of them, the times that people are on set. I think there's going to be a lot that adjusts the way that we schedule moving forward and the way, and the timeliness of how everything happens, so that we're aware that people aren't crossing over too much. And in terms of Theater for One, with our digital work, I feel like this has been something that we've had to take something that works and something that like really is a well-oiled machine when we're doing it in person, and we've had to radically shift what that looks like. So that required us not only thinking about the form and how that adjusts, but bringing on a digital team, bringing on a really incredible team of the open-ended group who has created this platform for us and has created a digital space, and expanding our own horizons for us as theater artists to start bringing in digital artists and start bringing in folks that the internet is their wheelhouse, and like these spaces that we have just stepped into in the past 2 years in terms of Zoom and video conferencing are spaces that they have been living in 10 and 15 years and waiting for the moment that culture shifts. So I think that there is something interesting to think about how future productions, if they're live and they're being managed, are going to be created, and what that means for in-person sets and production moving forward. But then there's this completely different thing where if we're moving into digital, as we have with Theater for One, it's almost expanding that team and bringing more voices to the table and really expanding the notion of what this can be, and what a team even looks like for a project like this. So I think that has been the biggest difference between the two.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And on a similar subject, Lana, as head of public programs and partnerships, as you've mentioned, top priority is engaging many publics. So how have you continued to engage, specifically, how have you continued to engage these publics in existing works of art, and the works of artists that you work with, as well as introducing new, maybe digital artists to the front of like artwork in
Absolutely.
general? Yeah.
I think the biggest lesson is that public programs are not one size fits all. There are so many different kinds of publics. And I think the hardest ones to get are people who are kind of scared of museums. We're free, we're open to the public, but we're kind of this shiny building with a park next to it. So sometimes you'll get families walking outside that don't even realize that this is a museum, that they can go inside, and there are workshops for younger children to kind of engage with the themes. We have learning kits for all of our different exhibitions for teachers or for parents or for young people to think about the artists at a different sort of wavelength, so that it's in a language that's more approachable. But then you also have people who are creative and already are kind of immersed in this world. So making sure that we're offering talks with artists. We have kind of a series for UAE-based sort of researchers, writers, and artists to get together and engage in critical conversations as well. So, this is kind of a broad range, but then we also have festivals. So our annual festival is called Down to Earth, and will be happening in November. And so that is attracting people who've maybe never heard of the museum, but they're interested in attending the festival because it's about sustainability, green, eco-conscious, but there's also a market, there's food. So kind of finding that comfort level for each person, so that they can kind of dip their toe into the water and say, you know what, it's not that scary. And then for them to kind of be retained and come to different events and be less intimidated and then bring more friends means that we've succeeded somehow.
Absolutely. It sounds like it's a delicate sort of dance, which is really interesting to hear. So my next question is more about the core values of your work. And in the sense, in what I've observed is that there's an upswing in the trend of the themes and core values of kindness and togetherness in during this pandemic, because so many people are going through the same horrible thing. So how have the core values of your work changed in that context? How do you approach art making now in the digital space, considering the difficulties that everyone is going through? Lana, would you like to start us off?
So in working for an institution that supports artists, I think the empathy and putting ourselves in their shoes is important. So when I was working with Nadim Shufi, who was in Beirut post-explosion, during COVID, there were so many things happening in the background, and his collaborators all reacted to the situation differently. Some immersed themselves in their work, whereas others had to withdraw and process what was happening around them. And I think in working with anybody, artists or non-artists, right now, we're realizing what might be bearing down on people's shoulders. And I think that this past 2-year period really made us realize that we're just people. You see people's homes when you're talking to them, sometimes their family or their dog pops into it. And kind of that division between professional self and private self has been kind of diminished a little bit, which helps us connect with each other a little bit better. We also worked on a project called the Research and Practice Platform, which was kind of a micro grant system. So we ended up awarding 75 grants between $1,000 and $3,000 immediately after COVID, which helped sustain artists who didn't necessarily have to deliver anything at the end of it. It was about supporting them so that they could continue their practice or pay their rent or eat food or pay their internet bill. And so I think that's what has emerged most for us, to kind of just always be mindful of what everyone is going through behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And I think that idea is definitely at the front of everyone's minds, considering that for a lot of meetings, we're zooming in from our homes. We're zooming in from very private spaces that wouldn't normally be part of our professional lives. Thank you, Lana. SRĐA.
Yeah, I think that a central theme in my work is creating spaces of community, whether that is, finding that people can see themselves on stage and feel represented, not only in the stories that they're seeing on stage, but also the community and the crowd in the audience, that people feel supported and they can step into themselves and their identities and all of the above. I think that that is something that, it's funny with Theater for One, which is this singular experience, and so much of it is about that connection, that moment between performer and audience member. One of the things that we have found in doing our live work is that one of the biggest moments where we create community is we have a line that lines up outside of the booth when we're performing live, or a queue when we are presenting internationally. So, but in that line or in that queue, as people line up, they start conversation. They start talking about how their day was. They start talking about the piece that they saw. They start talking about, their life, their lived experience. And it really does become this magical moment of community and connection, and people having a chance to chat with each other as they're waiting, 5 lines, the stranger. And over the years, it's been one of the beautiful things about Theater for One that anytime you see the booth outdoors, one of our biggest kind of promotional features is the fact that we have this giant line that's waiting to go into the booth, and it's people who are sharing and being very cordial and gregarious and all of the above. And once we moved into digital, it was really a question for us of like, how do you create that digital community? How do you create a space that does have these elements of community and connection and conversation, all of the above? So often we log into a Zoom and then we're on mute and we're waiting for like our screen to go up and ask our question. And, there's so many things too that in terms of a digital kind of webinar space as well, which don't allow for the free flow of like grabbing a coffee at the same time and saying hello to someone, or commenting on what someone's wearing, because everyone in the room can hear you if you're on Zoom. But we created this space that you will see if you are an audience member for Theater for One, that as you make your way into the experience, you are introduced to a space which we call our liminal space, but essentially it is like an anonymous chat room space where we have a moderator who moderates the room every day, but essentially you're in this space for in between 5 and 10 minutes, and it's a space of rest and reflection and community and conversation. And it's just a little bit of a palate cleanser before you get into your performance to kind of wash off the day, to think about some things that you may not have thought of before, to have conversations with some strangers and some new audience members that are in this room, and to really create that opportunity for community and connection in a digital space. So that is something that you'll experience, and I think that that is one of the ways that we are continuing to try to find in our digital performance spaces those continued attempts to create community, those continued attempts to find that kind of synergy that happens when you are an audience member, when you are in a space with other people who are experiencing the same thing as you. So we're pushing ourselves and really saying, like, what can we do to create these spaces digitally so that we don't lose those in the transition, and that we continue to give people that opportunity and that necessary opportunity just to connect with another human being.
100%. Thank you, SRĐA. As a former audience member, I actually attended a Theater for One performance last year, and I know the space that you're talking about. It was incredibly cathartic. I don't know if it's changed since then, but the gentle animations of everyone's comments appearing in like live time, it was incredible. So yeah, absolutely. And that brings us, so we're on our final few questions. So just a reminder to the audience members to throw in any questions that they have in the Q&A panel. So the artist will address them once we're done. So what are some of the lessons that you have learned, like individually, personally, some of the lessons that you have learned during this time? And like, how do you think the pandemic has changed your practice? SRĐA, would you like to start us off?
I found for myself personally that I have begun question. I think that once that we made this push where live performance was kind of on hiatus for a second, and we moved into this world of digital. It really started I've started asking the questions with my own work of how I can present my work to more and more people, how I can get my work and the work that I'm creating in front of more audiences than just the specificity of that local audience who can see that theater piece or can be in that specific time in that specific place. So I found for myself that I've been developing a lot more film and TV projects, which has been like a really exciting shift. A couple of documentary projects, unscripted works, writing my first screenplay, just with the idea of like creating these works that can be filmed and produced and put on and shared across the world is something that I have found so much pleasure and joy in, seeing the fact that family members in the Midwest or colleagues in California or coworkers in Kenya now can see the same work that can see the work that I'm doing in a way that had not been possible in the past, has really kind of shifted my own awareness of mediums. And that being said, how live performance can translate to a film and television medium. I think that has been one of the biggest things that I'm taking away for this. And in terms of lessons, I think the big thing that we're learning is, so my grandmother passed from COVID last summer, and I think that I learned that very little can be expected, and so that we are moving forward every day, and we have this kind of built-in ideology of like tomorrow is going to bring this, and we're building up for 3 years from now, and then this thing is, and then we're going to get to this place. And I think the kind of instantaneous shock of that, the shock of the pandemic, which I think just for, as much as we want to say we've been prepared for a pandemic for years, I think the moment it hit us as a global community, it was shocking in so many ways. I'm really kind of like, for me as a lesson is like, I am just creating work as much as possible and, trying to get my story out there and my refugee experience and my lived experience and everything about myself that I think the world needs to know, because I think tomorrow isn't promised. And I think that's one of the biggest things that has really ignited my work and just kind of is pushing me to create more and more and find these opportunities to share that work. And we never know what tomorrow, growing up from a refugee background, my parents will tell you, like, you don't know what tomorrow brings, so do as much, do what you can today, because tomorrow is never promised. And I think that that's found its way into my work too, and into my artistry of like really getting that work out and not holding so tight to it anymore and trying to be a perfectionist about it, but really just like sharing and getting it out there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Lana, same question. The lessons that you've learned throughout this, and how your personal interactions with your practice have changed during the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm going to break it down to a lesson and a word of advice. I think for me, the biggest lesson is that you really need to know your community and you can't stand alone. We in the UAE were really fortunate in that NYU was kind of really among the first to mobilize us so we could commiserate, but also collaborate. And so that was really important. And I really think that it helps you realize that things aren't necessarily the same for everybody. My Dubai experience is definitely not the same as your Abu Dhabi experience, is not the same as someone's Hong Kong experience, or someone in Lebanon or Palestine. And so being able to kind of collaborate and think about that. And I saw that there was a question that's asking about us kind of zooming into the future to sort of work past the pandemic. I think it's difficult for us to think that we're all able to kind of program as we did in 2019. Because, I mean, the artists that we're dealing with, for example, for an exhibition, have a 21-day quarantine to go back to in their home country after they come here. So really everything is forever different. And that's the biggest lesson we've learned. The word of advice I have is to never underestimate open calls, because I know how daunting applying for things is, writing personal statements, or even in some situations, kind of filling out more personal questions is. I really think that that's how we've discovered really wonderful people and gotten to collaborate with them, and also learned about projects we wouldn't have learned about otherwise. So I think for me, working on the institutional side, I can't push people enough to apply for them, whether you're up and coming, emerging, or established.
Thank you so much, Lana and SRĐA, for taking the time to dive into this conversation. The arts are a constantly evolving field. Discussions like this one are incredibly crucial, especially at moments like this. So with that, we will move to questions from the audience. We have quite a few really interesting ones. So to start off, from Bill Bragan, there's been a lot of talk about taking care of your artists. Taking care of your artists and taking care of your audiences. How do you prioritize if their respective needs start to diverge? SRĐA, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I think that is a great question, Bill. I think that there's a way that we have to kind of take a look at this as a hybrid approach, because I think for the longest time in working in the arts, I feel like artists' needs have oftentimes been secondary to what the audience wants and what the audience is expecting. I think what we're seeing in terms of this pandemic is a shift towards really kind of creating this, making sure that this art form that these artists are pouring their heart and soul and passion and energy and all of the above into is really an art form that is going to support them emotionally, mentally, spiritually, financially, all of the above. And so I think that for me, it's been an opportunity to take to think about that shift and to think about the ways that we prioritize our artists and that we make sure that they are getting what they need. And I think that energy will reciprocate to what the audience is wanting. I think we're still in a place where we're figuring out what audience members really want coming out of this pandemic, what they're comfortable with in terms of what it looks like if we're doing live performance, digital performance, all of the above. And I think as we're tackling that, I would say that my first instinct is to really prioritize the artist. And I think that once they are feeling confident and creating work, I think audiences will come back. I think audiences are going to want to support those artists that are passionate about investing their time and energy into these projects and into programming that really responds and supports them. And I do know that those things probably will diverge many times, along that path. But at the moment, I'm, really thinking of like audience first in terms of what they need, because I think that, or the artist first in terms of what they need, because I think that that's something that has the potential to kind of like shift the entire ecosystem of how we look at performance and theater.
Thank you, SRĐA. Lana?
I think that part of being a good programmer and being an intuitive institution is knowing when to put together which programs so that those divergences don't happen to begin with. And if you find that there's an underserved community, prioritizing that over the ones that are kind of the easy wins. So you might have a project in mind for, I don't know, frontliners. But frontliners are really busy right now. They're not going to be able to come to the museum, so kind of really reality checking what you have in mind. And I think part of working in an institution is also being diplomatic and making sure that everyone's needs are addressed in a respectful, collaborative way. So you end up kind of being a negotiator sometimes on behalf of your different publics.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. So our next question is from Dorian Rogers. Some patrons of the art seem to be tired of virtual events. Have you brainstormed any strategies to address Zoom fatigue, which you can recommend? And Lana, would you like to start us off?
Personally, I think it's not necessarily Zoom fatigue. I think it's that our lives shifted once more. And so I might have been available at 5 p.m. to attend a talk before, but now I might be hopping in the car at that time to go run an errand before I get home to cook dinner. So I think that people don't necessarily attend online talks unless there's something they really want to interact with, because the first question we get when we advertise something online is it recorded? Do I have to make time for it now? Or can I catch it later? So we have not really been focusing so much on online audiences because we're rebuilding our IRL audiences. I wish I had the magic answer for you, because I know everyone here is kind of trying to figure out the right balance of still maintaining those international audiences that wouldn't be able to fly over and experience an exhibition or a performance versus serving kind of your immediate community.
SRĐA, would you like to add to?
I think that we're in the midst of like a technological video calling revolution, in the sense that we've been using this platform, Zoom, for the past 2 years, but there are so many companies out there that are doing some really thrilling work in terms of kind of exploding the idea of video conferencing, doing augmented, reality, doing things with spatial audio that you're able to do in the same format. I mean, even theater, for one, the way that we've created the platform and all of the above, it takes these things that we're familiar with, which are, the screen and logging in and a video call and all of the above. But there are a couple of platforms out there that I think are pushing the boundaries, and I think we're going to continue to see that. There's one platform in specific that's called Nowhere, which I had the opportunity to work as a resident artist for and help them kind of create that space. But if you go to yournowhere.com, you can learn a little bit more about what they're doing. But I think that might be the next step in terms of like the specific Zoom fatigue, might be giving people some more exciting opportunities to engage that aren't as conventional as turning on a screen, but maybe involve something that is a little more exciting, that makes you actually want to tune in and makes you want to, be a part of this conversation or do it in a new way.
Thank you, SRĐA. We actually have one more question for you specifically from Ethan. SRĐA, what kind of theater work can be made in the digital space that cannot be made in the in-person space? What is different about the medium or artistic choices?
So I feel like there is a lot of crossover between the two. So what I'll say is, I think that there's one of the beautiful things that we found is that so many of the pieces that we're creating specifically for these Theater for One digital editions can exist in person. I think that what we're trying to also find is the hybrid approach of like, this doesn't have to be digital or this doesn't have to be in person. Like, let's create work that can exist in both mediums. I think that's something that has been a really exciting opportunity for us to explore. I think that there is something and maybe this is the wrong word, but I think that what digital really allows you to do is have this little like voyeuristic peek into someone's life, which I think you don't traditionally have in theater, because you're on, maybe if you're experiencing that's immersive and you're walking through someone's home, but like there is something about being like plopped into someone's reality that you don't traditionally find in theater, which I think is a really exciting opportunity for digital theater artists to create these speaks that really are about the environment. And we think about this frame as a very specific thing, but it tells you so much about a human being. And being able to stage a show that's in someone's apartment or that is in, you know, someone's bedroom is a very different thing than building a set on stage and having to stage a show in there. So I think that lived in human aspect is something that's really fun to lean into at theater, digital theater. I think there's also quite a few like technological opportunities there of, you know, there are things that we've become accustomed to in being in digital, like someone's video not working or someone's mic going off or something, you know what I mean? These little technological things that happen that I think are really fun to incorporate into digital theater, because they're things that we have become so aware of over the past 2 years, and using them as an element of the stage really can make that form feel way more specific. And then what's different about the medium or artistic choices? I think for me, the big thing is like, and I'm just like, as a director, it's like framing. It's like, when I'm on a stage, I have like the full stage. There's a lot of staging to do. There's, you know, there's people crossing in. When I'm doing digital theater, it's like I have from here to here, and like that has to tell a story that a full set can tell. So there is that element of depth and dimension and like what that space actually looks like. And I think that's a big, for me, design wise, artistically, is like, I think that's one of the biggest things, is like, because it, you know, you're working in film in a certain capacity where it's really about your frame and what you're seeing in that frame, and everything else is like, you know, there could be an elephant on this side of the screen, but if you're not seeing it, it's no longer important, because it's like the framing of that. So I think that really is it's a small answer to that question, but I think it's, for me, it's one of the big things that like I constantly think about between the two mediums.
Definitely. So we have time for one more question, and this one is from Lindsay. I've heard from many artists, producers, and programmers that there is pressure to transition out of the pandemic much faster than is possible. I'm curious about how both of you are managing the speed of this transition, and how both of you are taking into account what you have learned during this time. So, Lana, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I think erring on the side of conservatism is probably the best lesson in terms of capacities in events, or frequency of events, just to make sure that you build up quickly. You don't build up too quickly and people feel uncomfortable or crowded. So the key is for everything to kind of happen gradually, so that people don't feel like we had another sudden shift again, because some people are still kind of eating at home and not necessarily going to restaurants. So if we're putting these expectations on our audiences to attend events frequently, then maybe we are not in touch with reality. So just kind of being aware of all those different levels. I mean, we're in the same country, and Michael, I think Abu Dhabi is still kind of changing day by day, whereas Dubai kind of is in expo mode at the moment. So everyone is very events oriented. So I think slow and steady is probably the best approach.
Thank you so much, Lana. SRĐA, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that there is, it's funny because this is like, it's a question that, you know, is baffling artists and producers and programmers, like you said, Lindsay. And I think it's also just baffling humanity. I think that we're all in this place of like, we were given this directive, you know, close to 2 years ago, to stay home and focus on ourselves, and, you know, I mean, cut out all of these things that have become so built into our daily consciousness and the way that we exist just as human beings in the world. And then now that we are in this like slow, return to normalcy, it's a question of what does that look like? It's a question about what speed is right, like what my speed is different than someone else's speed, is different than some, you know what I mean, is different from a third person. Like I think that we all have different, like it's weird. I feel like we're all on the same road, but we have cars that are driving at like 7 million different speeds, and we're just trying to kind of like keep pace and make sure that we're not the last ones behind. But also I think there's a point where we don't want to be the first ones in line, so we're all trying to just like kind of hover around the middle. I think one of the things that's been interesting for me is, so we did an in-person so Theater for One came back. We just launched our new booth, our new theatrical space in Manhattan West about a month ago. And what we're finding is that was an in-person theatrical experience with, again, one audience member and one performer in a booth with a plexiglass screen. Audience member was masked, like very, you know, I mean, every sort of COVID procedure that could be followed was followed in terms of making sure that that audience member was comfortable in that solo performance space. But it's just interesting because there are people that even that was too far for them, coming back to live performance, even though that it's an individual person, or coming to, you know what I mean, I had conversations with a number of audience members that were like, this is the only live performance that I'm going to do. I don't feel comfortable going to, you know, being in an audience with even 100 people or even 50 people, like if it's not outdoors, or, you know, I think everyone is going to have their own rules and limits. And I think that it's going to be something that we're not going to have an answer by this fall or this winter, or I'm sure even that, you know what I mean, next spring. I think it's something that is just going to evolve and become a part of our human consciousness. And maybe 2 years from now, we'll get this group together again and we'll come back to that question and see how we've all adjusted in the interim. But I think it's something that like humanity is shifting, and, you know, the artists and programmers of it all, I think that we're trying to, you know, figure it out alongside everyone else.
Definitely. Just to everyone here with us, I hope you've learned as much as I have about the new challenges and opportunities for innovation in the arts during the past 2 years and moving forward. And again, thank you so much, Lana and SRĐA, for joining us today. And with that, I hand it over to Reem to close us up. Thank you so much.
Thank you once again, Lana and SRĐA, for this insightful conversation, and to Michael Cookat, our wonderful moderator, who is also one of our amazing NYUAD students. The performances of Theater for One, We Are Here Nairobi edition, will be featured on September 15th to 19th and 22nd to 26th. But it's sold out. Keep your eyes peeled for any cancellation, and you can always check our website for upcoming performances and off the stage events. Thank you so much for taking part, and have a wonderful evening.